Jak and Daxter started out with a lively hub world, open environments, and a simple plot. But as the game went on, the hub worlds became empty and desolate, the environments became more dull and similar, and the plot attempted to take on more than it could. I went into Jak II knowing that the game differentiates itself a lot from its predecessor in a lot of ways, such as giving Jak a voice, shifting the tone from lighthearted plot to a heavier narrative, and adding weapon play with guns as opposed to Mario-like power-ups. The question to ask though is, does any of it work? Or does it fall flat on its face and act as an example of how a series should always stick to its initial design? Like last time, here's a quick 1-minute summary of the plot for anyone who needs a refresher or has never played the game. Samos, Kira, Jak, and Daxter are all thrust into the future and land in a closed-off, fascist state led by Baron Praxis, who abducts Jak and experiments on him with Dark Eco before he's saved by Daxter. The Dark Eco allows Jak to become— oh, yeah, I get it now. Jak and Daxter join the Underground, a resistance group that wants to take Haven City back from Baron Praxis, and end the war between Praxis and the monsters lurking outside the city known as Metalheads. You find out later that the war between the Metalheads and Praxis was staged by the leaders of both factions to make Praxis seem stronger for leading his people. Long story short, the Metalhead leader ends up rebelling and killing Praxis, only to be stopped by Jak and Daxter, who then decide to stay in the future instead of going back to the past because— oh my god. Okay, so a bit into this game, you're introduced to this child, who was actually Jak as a kid. Turns out Jak is actually from the future, and that he was sent into the past with young Samos by adult Jak, who came into the future with aged Samos from the past because he was sent by his adult Jak, all to fulfill the prophecy of Jak coming into the future and saving Haven City from Metalheads. Okay, I had to reread that about 4 times just to make sure that it made at least a bit of sense. Leaving out the time travel for the moment, this story comes off as much more interesting and engaging than the one in the first game. The shift in tone serves the game incredibly well, and allowing Jak to speak for the first time is something that the writers clearly knew how to use to their advantage. As I said in the previous video, he had no personality in the first game, so placing him in a drastically different setting and having him react to darker story elements doesn't require a major change in character, because there was no character in the first place. This is essentially, and almost literally, the beginning of his story. And it's a very well conceptualized story too. The artificial war between Praxis and the Metalheads is one of the many twists that the player has no reason to see coming, keeping them constantly engaged. Other twists include finding out that you're in the future, that Samos and Kira have been hiding in the city the whole time, and that the young boy is actually you from another timeline. There's a lot of depth to the story, partly because of the change in tone and atmosphere, but also because the writers were given more to work with. Well conceptualized doesn't equal to well executed, however. With the more serious tone, for some reason, comes a much longer playtime. Around 14 hours to be exact. This is compared to the around 7 hours I spent on Jak I. A long playtime, I would argue, is not inherently an issue, but Jak II undeservingly flaunts its longer playtime even though most of it comes from padding. The game will find a way to make you complete the most mundane tasks like escort missions, destroying Praxis's armored vehicles in the streets, and even rhythm-based quick-time events which almost have no context or place in the game whatsoever. These missions barely serve the plot and are justified by telling you that by doing X, Y, and Z, we'll be putting a dent in Praxis's forces. For every major relevant mission in the game, it seems as though there are 3 unnecessary boring ones. The game could have been 7 hours long and been more fun for this reason. I don't need to go out and destroy armored vehicles for the 4th time to get satisfaction from the game. I'd rather do it in a context where it actually means something and isn't pathetically justified through poor writing. The change in tone has been cited as Naughty Dog's first attempt at implementing a much more serious storyline in their work though, and playtime aside, I consider it to be an overall success that clearly only led to greater things later on. To me, however, while there are a lot of good things that come out of the change in tone, such as a more engaging story, an actual personality for Jak, and more character interactions, the best part of it all is that Daxter isn't unbearable anymore. You ever hear of the show Joey? It was a spin-off of the show Friends starring the character Joey, who was widely considered to be the main comic relief character in a show that was already funny, but also sometimes handled character drama that got a bit more serious. Ultimately, the spin-off failed to take off and gain the same numbers that the original Friends show did, and for many reasons. One of those reasons, though, is that any character that is meant to play comic relief is meant to play comic relief. Comic relief is the inclusion of a joke or line or character that is meant to take away from the tension of a scene or show. When there's no tension to take away from, however, the comic relief ends up not being able to serve the purpose that they should, which is why Joey changed the character's personality to be more serious at times, another reason that the show didn't work out, but that's beside the point. The reason I bring any of this up is that Daxter was essentially Joey in the first game, a comic relief character that never had any tension to cut. The whole game was silly, Daxter was just louder than everyone else. In this game, thankfully, though, Daxter actually works and fulfills the purpose that he's meant to fulfill. With a darker tone, more threatening characters, and a more specific danger in the world other than this guy wants to kill everyone, Daxter is given a lot more to work with and never fails to serve his purpose of alleviating the mood in serious times.
We're looking for a guy named Torn. Core sent us. Are you Torn?
Maybe this guy's a mute, like you used to be.
The sewers used to be a fabulous smuggling route for me before the Baron installed security devices.
And before those late-night snack runs kept you from fitting out the front door. We the Racers hereby agree to give crew all proceeds from race earnings, endorsement fees, broadcast royalties, syndication residuals, vehicle sponsorships, small appearance fees, collectible card assets, fast food tie-ins, use of likeness rights, talk show deals, clothing lines, all print rights including book, novella, comic, pamphlet, ticket tape, neon sign, and bathroom graffiti designs. Toy rights, shoe lines, mood rings, game rights. Game rights?
Get off. I think Crew's trying to... What?
Relax. Watch me butter up Bun Boy. Hey there, stuffed crust! How's it feel floating on top of the food chain?
A lot of those lines were actually funny and made me laugh at the time. I was legitimately impressed. Moving on from Daxter though, there is that one thing I said I would address. The time travel. I'll admit, as much as I tend to find them poorly executed most of the time, I'm a sucker for time travel plots. Jak II kind of messes the time travel aspect of the story up, but not in the way that you would think. The time travel story itself makes sense, I can't really argue against that. It follows the classic fixed timeline theory where no matter what the characters do, the timeline stays the same. As previously mentioned, young Jak goes to the past with Samos to be trained and become an adult, who is sent to the future at that stage in his life, only to find himself as a child in the future and send that young version of himself back to the past, thus fulfilling the prophecy of him coming back as an adult to liberate Haven City. It makes sense, and I'm glad it does. It's not even that complicated, the game does a good job of explaining it without treating you like a child or making it too complex. My issue is that this whole time travel plot about the idea of sending Jak back to the past to become who he is today and the fact that the young kid is Jak, it's only brought up in the last 20 or so minutes of the game. That's 20 minutes of 14 hours. 14 hours they could have better used to introduce the idea of time travel, the idea of Jak being stuck in a time loop, the idea of being this chosen one that was always meant to save the city. While the logic behind the time travel plot is solid and checks out, the way it's introduced in the 11th hour as if it's this moment that was hinted at the whole time when it really wasn't, takes away from this game's accomplishment of pulling off the time travel correctly in the first place. A slip up like that isn't the end of the world though. There are still other things to praise about the game. One of the biggest things being how the game plays, more specifically how it builds upon the way Jak I played. Jak controls the same at his core, but gone are the Mario-like power-ups of the first game and introduced are the guns and Dark Eco. Collecting Dark Eco allows you to transform into Dark Jak, which gives you harder hitting, faster attacks, and area of effect attacks that can one-shot enemies once you upgrade your Dark Jak form enough times. You can use it as a last resort when you're in a tough spot and surrounded by enemies, or you can use it when you've run out of ammo and need to take out a few metalheads. Really, it's just a kill everyone mode that's fun to use. It's also balanced well enough so that you can't use it too often, but you'll also generally have it up for when you need it. The gunplay really seems out of place at first, considering it's introduced almost immediately in the beginning of the game, and the game right before this one in the series was infinitely more cartoony, but it actually fits in for two major reasons. The first being that it works. As you go through the game, you get more guns to use, each serving their own purpose. Switching through the guns is done by using the D-pad, making it quick and convenient, and allowing combat to feel fluid. With each gun having its own style too, and the enemies that are thrown at you being pulled from a large selection, you're constantly switching between weapons and sometimes even mixing gunplay up with melee attacks. The second reason that the gunplay fits in with the game is that it both complements and is complemented by the world design. Jak I, in my opinion, did a poor job of establishing the world in which the game takes place in, and that was one of the issues that I had with the game that I mentioned in the previous video. Jak II, from the very beginning, however, sets the tone of the world around you by placing you in a visually bleak world that matches the dystopian society that everyone keeps telling you that you're in now. Both the visuals and what the people you interact with tell you about Haven City match one another, so it's not happy people living in an empty town or a colorful city with depressing people everywhere. The world feels carefully crafted because of this and the way the hub world connects to other parts of the world. With only one or two exceptions, you're always traveling to your destination on foot, be it inside or outside the city's borders. When you're traveling outside of the city, you're not going on long hoverbike rides that slowly transition from Haven City to Metalhead territory like Jak I's tube levels that would take you from world to world. Jak II shows you that the metalheads really have taken over the areas surrounding Haven City, right outside the border. The people of the city do have a reason to be afraid. Visiting these locations outside the border shows you how sad and desolate the future really is. Between the hub world, certain parts of the story, the gunplay, and the character interactions, I would say Jak II's biggest accomplishment is making the player feel as though they are a part of one big, helpless dystopian future. The comic relief in the form of Daxter's character works well and takes some of the edge off so that not everything is super bleak, but neither the dark nor humorous elements of the story are ever taken out of proportion. Like I've made clear though, not every nail is hit on the head. The constant distractions and almost double the necessary playtime are a big damper on the game and the experience you can have with it. It's less so having a feeling of, I just want this game to be over, and more so the feeling of, okay, when's the payoff? When does the story progress? These questions kept popping up in my head to the point where I just couldn't enjoy the game at some point. World building and character interactions can only set up your game so much. After a while, you risk things getting stale if you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, especially when the characters you interact with are all part of such a limited pool. Bigger than Jak I's pool, but still limited. So as of now, if I were to put the Jak games on a scale from bad to amazing, Jak I would be somewhere over here, somewhere near meh or average, and Jak II somewhere around good, but wouldn't replay. And then there was one. Where does Jak III go? I can't help but hope that it'll be better than both, finding a way to balance Jak I's playtime and straight to the point attitude, and Jak II's great atmosphere and appreciation for the plot. As I've learned though, hopes and reality can differ greatly. The next video will be on Jak III and hopefully how it attempts to balance the better parts of both of its predecessors. Until then, thank you for watching.